Good afternoon and welcome to the next Vintage Legends interview. Here today with Tom Newman. My name is Graham and I'm with the Vintage Guitar Players group. You can find us on facebook.com/groups/the Vintage Place. Remember to hit subscribe below, and you can also check us out on Instagram at 95 Vintage Legends. Now, like I say, today I'm here with Tom Newman, who needs no introduction, musician and producer. If you don't mind to get ball rolling, can you tell us initially just a little bit about your own music? What kind of music you play?
What I play? Well, it's completely non-commercial. It's not. I've never written anything that's sold more than half a dozen copies. I don't think. But I've got a lot of albums. I kind of wangled my way into being on record by starting. I started in a skiffle band way back in the 50s. And then we got into the blues, like everybody did in London. And I started a band called the Tomcats, which we played all the London gigs, Eel Pie Island, 100 Club, all the London gigs. And we ended up going to Spain for a year or two. In 1966, we became quite big in Spain, covering all the Stones.
Okay.
All the, Satisfaction and all that. Did these terrible covers for the Stones, that was good. Then we broke up, and we were managed by Alexis Corner and a fella called Alex Herbage, who owned the 100 Club, what's it called? Beat City in London, up near Oxford Street. And we built a studio in under Beat City, and it all went wrong because he didn't get planning permission, and then all of a sudden he got nicked for some massive bank fraud that he'd done that we didn't know anything about. So that all fell apart. All our gear got taken back. We got a complete set of brand new, beautiful Vox 50-watt amps in the chrome Beatles stands and everything. We thought, wow, we're going there. And it all fell apart. All the amps got taken back.
Oh, no.
So the band split up for a bit. But then we started another band called July, which got signed by Philip Solomons to the Major Minor label, which was in '68. We did about 2 or 3 gigs, one at the Albert Hall, and we made a record called July that it died the death because about 2 weeks after the record came out, the record company collapsed and folded. We started to consider ourselves to be like the death of anyone who comes near it.
Lucky white heather.
Lucky, yeah. I mean, well, but bizarrely, and then I met Richard Branson and started Virgin. I got him to build a studio in Oxford called the Manor, and then Mike Oldfield turned up in a band doing just depping for somebody, Arthur Lewis. It was called. And while he was there, he played me a little tiny demo tape of what ended up to be Tubular Bells. I mean, it wasn't Tubular Bells on the demo. It was a lot of little beautiful pieces of music that were recorded just on Kevin Ayres' tape recorder, actually. And he overdubbed by putting sticky tape over the erase head. And overdubbing directly on tape, like sound on sound. And so we did Tubular Bells, and then the Virgin happened. And as a part of the reason for me to build the studio was to get studio time for my own stuff. I wanted to be a rock star, so the whole idea of the Manor was me. In my head, it was me conning Richard into building me a recording studio. There was no idea. I mean, but then when Michael came into it, I suddenly realised that it was such a good album to do. I mean, it needed doing because it was just beautifully played and beautifully imagined. Richard didn't understand it, but bless him. Simon Draper, who was the other director of Virgin at the time, went for it. He had a gigantic record collection. He was a real music fan. So he persuaded Richard to go for it. And once Richard went for it, even though he didn't know what he was doing really, he's got such a determination, you know, to succeed that it all went from there. And part of the deal, as far as I was concerned, although I became a shareholder and a director of Virgin at that time, was give me some studio time. So I got my own studio time for a bit, and I did a record of my songs called Fine Old Tom, which came out on Virgin and sold about 6 copies, I think. But then all of the early Virgin records, apart from Tubular Bells, weren't actually aimed at the hit parade. You know, because Simon was a connoisseur, and he was into alternative sounds and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising it didn't sell. But then I left Virgin because I couldn't see that going. And I built a studio on a barge on the Paddington Canal.
Okay.
And then I got a deal with Decca and did a record called The Fairy Secret. And being Irish, I had all this mad fairy stuff going on, you know, pixies and fairies and stuff. So the Fairy Secret came out, and that didn't sell that well either, even though it was on Decca. Because, you know, my stuff's a bit too difficult to listen to. Really. It's not that obvious. What happened then? I can't remember. Oh, lots of years past. I produced a lot of people, a lot of Michael stuff. I worked with Cat Stevens and
Yeah.
all sorts. I can't remember. I've got no idea. I'm too old now to remember anything.
I mean,
But then,
even
about 20 years later, after the July record came out, 20 years went by, just, you know, life being life, and all of a sudden, one of the band members in July, Alan James, the bass player, he phoned me up and said, "Do you know July? A second-hand July record just sold for £1,000 quid." And so I looked into it, and for some weird reason, the July album had soared up the kind of, I don't know, psychedelic, I suppose it was called. They called it psychedelic. We didn't see it as psychedelic when we wrote it, because we were just trying to be like the Beatles, you know, we just wanted to be a pop band. It got picked up by the kind of progressive, slightly psychedelic heads, and it's been right up in the top 10 of old rock record, old psychedelic records. I mean, there was one on eBay this time last year for 3,500 quid. The dearest that one's ever gone was five grand, about 5 or 6 years ago. One went for £5, but it was in perfect condition. I mean, it's a bit nerdy in that, but it's still, it got us back together. We reformed July, and we did 3 or 4 gigs, and we went down a storm. And the amazing thing is that we went to Spain to do a couple of gigs as well, and we did this outdoor gig, and it was run by a generator, and the generator ran out of fuel halfway through the But we just carried on. It was in a great big marquee, so it didn't, you know, we just carried on. And the amazing thing was that all the lovely audience, I mean, you know, this was when I was in my 60s. There was most of the audience were between, I suppose, 15 and about 25.
Okay.
That the audience that we were trying to go for in 1966, but this is in 2000 and something. And all the audience knew the words, so it was such a gratifying feeling to. It's just me and the acoustic guitar because all the electrics gone off, and Chris on drums, and we did about 3 or 4 songs before they got the power back on.
Yeah.
Just with acoustic and drums, and everybody else pumping it up.
It's quite an experience, eh?
Singing along, it was a really, really heartwarming thing, you know.
It's quite an amazing thing that you managed to have that sort of an experience. Like I said, it's just a shame that it's obviously before that, but
wow,
no less well deserved, you know.
That made everything worth it in a way, just to have the realization, actually, that the July album songs had passed through 2 generations of kids, you know. It was wonderful.
It's definitely a testament to the strength of the music in any case, you know, definitely.
Yeah. And then, meantime, I did a lot of other solo albums. I must have about 20 albums now. I don't know how many. I should look all that up one of these days.
Just a few.
Yeah. And the last album I did for Michael was Tubular Bells 2, which was did in 1992. Yeah. I haven't seen him since because he moved away and, you know, did other stuff. And I didn't like the one I did with him, Tubular Bells 2, I didn't like because he'd become kind of enamoured with modern dance stuff, so he wanted Trevor Horn to co-produce it with him. You know? Okay. Trevor's all right. I got on well with Trevor, but we disagreed about everything to do with Michael's music. I wanted him to do it like we did the Tubular Bells one, and he played every note all the way through because there was no looping or cut and paste. So, and I think that we had lots of friendly-ish arguments about the fact that you know, as soon as the brain, and I had a psychologist friend who understood these things, who said that what happens with cut and paste is that as soon as the brain, when it listens to any set of sounds that are persistent, it's always looking for danger. You know, it's the fight or flight instinct. Yeah. Still left. So, and once the brain recognizes that something is there's no danger, it stops listening to it in the same way. So, you know, a repeated riff that's played by hand, everything is very slow. Even the best bass player in the world can't play that consistently. Wouldn't even want to, you know. Yeah. And that keeps the brain interested because it's constantly looking for differences. But as soon as you cut and paste something, and it's exactly the same, after about three rounds, it goes to sleep. And
switch off.
Something else to find interesting. So that didn't go. Michael insisted on cutting and pasting, and I think the album suffered for it, actually. Okay.
I must say, I prefer, anytime recording, I prefer myself just to do from scratch. If you can ask or something, get it done right next time.
Yeah, absolutely, completely. Yeah. And, you know, people say, well, Mozart would have done it if he could have done it. I'm not so sure he would. You know. I don't think we progressed far enough to actually discover anything in digital repetitive music that is that.
I would
I mean,
surmise as well, anyone of that kind of, time, um, to suggest there would be a possibility of, recording things in the first place might have been in itself, really quite something. Never mind to have it like recording. We'll just cut this bit out and we'll just like get rid of it. And we'll just magically have this other bit come in, because even that's like generations and decades, beyond past tape recording and even the things you could do with that, it's
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
it's madness.
I still try and do everything by
Yeah.
hand. I mean, sadly, I've, I've had this computering's contraction, which has stopped me being any good now. So I just juggle with the bits and pieces I've got.
You're probably still better than
Working
me in any case.
on, I'm
Uh,
working on a fine old Tom Part 2 now, which
but
will probably be the last album that I do. But I don't know. I keep getting little ideas, and so I put down bits of instrumental stuff. But I'm not interested in uh, anything that's commercial, viable. So
yeah.
I will always be singing.
Suit yourself. It's always the best way to do it. At least that way you've not sold your soul or something. Well, if you don't mind, obviously on the kind of note of guitars and such, how did you first discover vintage?
JHS was always around. I mean, it's been there for so long that it was always one of those like Selma, like or so they were kind of a good old reliable JHS night out. If you wanted any kind of needle into it was a good bet that you'd find something on the JHS catalog. But I think, as soon as they started making nice not copies, but influenced guitars like the Strat, like everybody,
Yeah.
and everybody does an SG and a Les Paul, and they started having some character. I think the first one that I came across, I was producing a guy called Jazz Man.
Okay.
He had a band called Babylon Zoo. Oh,
Yeah.
good 20, maybe 20 years ago. I can't remember now. But we went out to. We wanted to do it in Miami, so we all flew out to Miami. And he had a vintage Les Pauly thing.
Yeah. One of
And
the
it
V100s.
was brilliant. And I thought, Jesus, this is serious. This is a really, really good guitar. And he wouldn't play anything else. He had plenty of money. He could have had a proper Les Paul, but he really liked this little Les Paul. We did the whole new whole album with it. It was wonderful. So and then I started to realise they had some nice acoustics coming up. And I bought a lovely little parlour guitar with a slotted headstock. It looks just like a Gibson 180, a small jumbo,
Yeah.
yeah, circular body, form with a tight, nice little waist. And it was lovely. And in fact, I still got it, but I lent it to a friend of mine in Ireland. And when I moved out of Ireland, I forgot about it, so we still got it. But then I've produced an album for Paul Brett many, many years ago, in the 70s. And Paul and I have been mates, not that we see each other that much, but we confirm friendship,
Yeah.
And we've got similar political attitudes as well, so we get on very well. And he moved into a house in North Wales and invited me up, so I went up and he was doing a thing called the Lynn Guitar Festival.
Yeah.
He was throwing ideas about, and he started doing designs for for JHS acoustic because he's got a gigantic, lovely guitar collection.
Yeah,
Not dead
19
posh.
vintage designs as well.
Well, what I like about Paul's collection is it's not Ponzi based. It's not based on the big national names and, you know, the Ponzi, very expensive guitar. He does the whole range. He's got a collection that covers, you know, the really cheap guitars that the early blues players had to have because they couldn't afford, you know, Gibsons.
Yeah.
So there was all sorts of, you know, those very cheap American guitars. And so I think he started to see reproducing them, but in a finer way.
Yeah.
He's been doing brilliant. The trouble is, he's a 12-string player. No, this is a 12-string. Sorry, Paul. But he's designed all these lovely little 12 strings, and then he come up with this one that I've got two of, this Raven, which is, and I think it's brilliant. It's easily as good as I've had Gibson's J200s and J180s, and this is just as good as any Gibson, and it's got a brilliant set of electrics. And I love the neck because it's slightly wider, you know, and it suits my fisty hand. So I think what's happening now with the JHS range is that they've hit on something because they're not charging Ponzi prices either, and it's an opening for younger players and even not, you know, even professional players because the guitars, even though they're not pricey, they are to the highest professional standards. You can't, it'd be very hard to find a bad JHS guitar, vintage guitar. I think that's brilliant, you know, taking over the world on this side of the ocean. There's worried manufacturers in America at the moment, seeing about how brilliant they are. That's magic.
Well, I know as well, obviously, as we kind of chatted about earlier, obviously you make your own electrics and such as well, and you had one such example I can see just off camera.
Well, this was the sort of one that this is a half-finished commission for a guy in New Zealand, and it's basically an electric with a stacked humbuckers and a little Hofner type control panel goes in there. It's a nice wide neck. I mean, it's a novelty really. They're novelty guitars, but I've always enjoyed putting weird things together. I started a whole series of what I call rack guitars a few years ago. And
if nothing else, it keeps you out of mischief, you know.
I stuck an acoustic Taylor neck with an ebony fretboard onto an Epiphone SG type body with a humbucker in it, with a D90 on it. And it's lovely to play, and it sounds great as well. Even that it's only a Chinese D90, it's not a real one, but it's lovely sound, you know.
As long as it sounds good, that's all that matters, you know. And if you think in terms of just for your own kind of preference, if you had to, I suppose, come up with your own kind of vintage model, or if you would like to see something else that they would produce in future, what do you reckon you would like to see from them?
I don't see that they're doing anything wrong. But, I mean, just because of my I'm so old that I grew up with Donegan and the Everly Brothers. Epiphone tried to do an Everly Brothers, but it was really crap. I mean, I bought it because it had double kick guards, and it was great to. It looked okay, you know, and it was like a J180 size, but they just didn't. They treated it like a novelty, They didn't take it as a serious acoustic. And I think that, I mean, this vintage Raven it's just a tiny bit smaller than the J180.
Yeah.
And but I love the size of the fretboard. And the only problem is that, I mean, it could be, with a bit of modification, it could be a really good contender for that kind of, that big, middly kind of Nashville sound that you get out.
Yeah.
Without being a great show off, you know, a discrete J200 jumbo size thing that properly made like they do, which have really good tuners and double water shell pickouts as well, if you like, just to make it, give it that heavily double. I think that would be lovely, but I don't know if the Everlys are gone now, so bless them. But I don't know what the difficulty, it might be a difficult thing to be that blatant towards, you know, copy of.
Well, who knows?
I don't know.
That'd be nice.
Study the law on it, I suppose.
That's this weekend's activity for us. By the way, we're going to have a look on copyright law. You mentioned obviously thinking about your own music. You mentioned that you've got one last album you're going to be working on just now. When do you reckon that might?
Well, I started it about a year ago, in the middle of the lockdown thing.
Okay.
And the other thing we did, in fact, kind of reflects on this. We did another July album during the lockdown, at the very beginning of the lockdown, about 2 years. And it came out on Cherry Red Records. Cherry Red's a great label.
Yeah.
I like that, because they kind of research and find stuff that is very hard to find, you know, old rockers.
Yeah, Paul's got some stuff on there too.
Yeah, and we did it as a double album, and because I'm living on the Isle of Wight now, we called it the White Album. So yeah, and it was it was a set up a bit like the Beatles were. And it's done all right, but it suffered like anything that suffers if you don't do it right. Because of the lockdown, it was only me and Pete in the band doing it, because we were the songwriters anyway.
Yeah.
So, and he lives in East Anglia over by Brinton. So,
Okay.
you know. So we were passing, ideas digitally.
Yeah.
And it was all had to be done with, because we're not drummers, and we didn't, all that stuff. And it suffered terribly retrospectively now, looking at it. You can't get in a studio with a backing track band, with a band, and have a live drummer and a live bass player and live songwriter. It just doesn't work. I mean, people have done it successfully, but not during a lockdown, and not writing songs in that kind of distracted way.
Yeah. I think there's a chemistry thing that you can't replicate,
Yeah. So what I want to do with the second final comment is to wait until I can get a drummer and a bass player. I mean, I've got a drummer and a bass player available, and I've got to that again, because we live so far apart. The drummer lives in Nottingham.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember what we got out of that. Bass player lives in Suffolk as well, so he's all right. I mean, I could get him, but we could get it. I'd love to be able to do it with real people in real.
Yeah. It can make a difference, Well, in terms of then, obviously, then release, when do you think that might potentially come up then?
I've kind of just, once I've finished this, Herbert's Bridge that I'm doing with Rob Reed, we're doing a remake of Herbert's Bridge, and it's coming out brilliantly. With, Ruben Alvarez, who's the Spanish Mark Hedfield. It's so much better than the original Herbert's Bridge. Sorry, Mark, it's good. Once I've done that, which is going to be probably, no, we won't. No, it won't take that. As soon as I've done that, that's what I want to do. The only other thing that's come up is that because next year, next May, it's the 50th anniversary of Tubular Bells.
Yeah. Oh.
There's a bit of rumbling going on about getting me to produce a live film.
Really? No reason.
We haven't got the venue sorted yet. We have to do it in pink PUH very good version. Or the other thing, but that's all not definite. You know, that could be next year. But I still, as soon as I finish this one, I want to get into the final. You never know how long it's going to last.
To see that.
Yeah.
Many years yet, many healthy years yet.
I hope so, yeah, but they're dropping like flies. So many of my mates have just dropped dead, you know, over the last 3 or 4 years, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
It's a shame, but, you know, we all get that. So.
I suppose we all have a shelf life, but it's always good to, it's always, such things I think happening are always a reminder to try and, I suppose, without sounding ridiculously sanctimonious, just be grateful for the things we have and try and not lose sight of that, you know. And obviously, Cherry Redding, is that the place to go to kind of check out any future releases? Have you got a website as well?
About 4 years ago, no, 3 years ago, I think, just before the lockdown, they bought all of my catalogue, my entire back catalogue. And they're bringing that out in little box sets. Was the first one, the July box set has happened. So all of the July and Tomcat records that we now are now on Cherry Redding in the box set. They've got the July White album. They're over the next year, I suppose, or so, they're going to be bringing out all of my Barry Moon, Hound of Ulster, and I can't remember the names of them.
Once you get 20 albums, there's a few there.
They're all there somewhere. I should actually get this together so that if anybody wants to talk to me about it, I can at least know what I've done.
Like you say, nothing else helps the pension, you know.
Absolutely.
I'll make sure I've got a link up to obviously your social media and such, but let me say very grateful for your time today, Tom. It's been an absolute pleasure to sit and chat with you and to listen to all this information, because like I say, there's so many stories. If you don't ask, you will never find out, you know. So it's amazing to hear all these things. So thank you so much for your time today.
I'm just grateful to be noticed by somebody. Very nice to meet you, Brian. We'll keep in touch. And I'll send you bits and pieces to anything you want, you know, and cover them.
Yeah, listen, great appreciate it. You take care.
And you, sir.
Thanks.